Hi there, plant parents. Welcome back to the Italian Garden. Great to see you. I'm John, your host. And today we're going to be covering a topic that has been covered by several, but we're going to make up an actual mix of our own. And this is great for beginner gardeners to learn that you can make up soil mixes by yourself and actually produce about 3 times the quantity of what you could buy in a bag soil mix at the department store. It's very easy, requires about 5 ingredients to make, and it's great for your container gardens, your raised beds, and even your potted plants inside. Now this mix is typically 30% coconut coir, 30% peat moss, 20% of a perlite to keep your air kind of in that soil, and then we usually use about 20% compost or worm castings is our blend. So let's get good through it. We're going to kind of answer a few common questions, a few common misconceptions, and we're going to open up your mind into thinking that you can definitely do this and you can save money at home and be a little bit more frugal with your gardening. Let's get into it. So why this specific mix? Now, the answer to that is we're going to break it down by the actual ingredients. So let's go through it. First off, we have our coconut coir, this is a 10-pound brick of coconut coir right here in front of you. Coconut coir is made from coconut husks, and it's a sustainable alternative to peat moss, which technically is kind of a renewable resource as well. It just takes a while to break down, but it is a sustainable alternative to peat moss. And the coconut coir holds water like a sponge, so if you have water retention issues, it really helps with that. But also it doesn't have any sort of acidifying nature to it, so it is a completely inert substance for the roots to grab water and also grab nutrients that is in a liquid form. So liquid fertilizers will actually absorb quite well into this, and it will help balance your entire plants out. Next up, we have our peat moss, and peat moss is a less sustainable alternative, but it is a reason why we put about 38% of this in here is it does the same thing as coconut coir. It holds moisture like a sponge, but it gives one added benefit, and that added benefit is it increases acidity. Most plants that you're going to be dealing with in the garden are going to like a pH range of anywhere from 7 to all the way down to 5.5. A lot of plants are completely happy with that, and you want your pH to be within those tolerance ranges because your plants are actually needing that pH to be in that certain range to adequately uptake nutrients. If they aren't able to uptake nutrients, then they aren't able to feed themselves. You end up with what's called nutrient lockout, and that is something that happens when they have too much magnesium in the soil, too much acidity in the soil, or even too alkaline in their soil, and they won't be able to uptake the nutrients because their whole balance is thrown off. Think about almost your gut as, like, when you take probiotics, you probably feel pretty good, right? It's kind of the same thing as plants. When they don't have the right kind of acidity in their gut and they don't have the right microbiome, because all of the microbes that like those acidities, or that range of acidity, 7 to 5, are dead because it's too alkaline up here at 8, or it's too acidic down there at 4 or 3 even, then they won't be able to survive. So it's the same thing with your plants. You need to be able to give them the proper ranges of pH. So this is going to be a mix that's good for kind of your common house plants, most typical house plants. Things like roses and azaleas probably won't like this mix as much, or even blueberries. Blueberries want more peat moss added. Regardless of coco being such a great substance, it doesn't add acidity. So if you're just using coco coir, you're going to have to add something like sulfur to balance your acidity. All right, let's move on to the next one. Compost. This is your typical bag compost. So you can get this at most garden supply stores for a fairly good price. This I got at one of my local garden supply stores here in my town. This was about $7. So it was about $7 for this. And I'll do a breakout of how much it costs per item here on the screen once we end this segment. But when it comes to compost is your ground. It is your rock. It is everything that you need in your soil mix to be able to produce that soil mix well and to feed your plants. So a good compost is always necessary in your potted plant mix, as well as even it's beneficial in your seed starting mix. I think worm castings are even more beneficial, to be honest, in your seed starting mix because they have way more macronutrients and micronutrients in them. But a good quality compost can be used for this here, and you can get it from any of your garden supply stores, or you can buy it in bulk and have it brought to your house from your landscape management in your town possibly. But you need to be careful with those because sometimes they might have contaminants. You definitely want a nice, not a contaminant free and no weed seed. It needs to be basically guaranteed that there's not going to be any weeds in here. So this, you're going to want to add to this about 20% of that to your mix. So that's our compost is this tall bag right here. This tall bag right here is perlite. Perlite is a white rock, and that white rock, it does one thing really, is it allows for aeration and also some water absorption. It will retain some water, but it really stops compaction. And that's really what we're using this for. That's why we put about 20% of the mix with perlite, because perlite helps our soil not squeeze down. You think about, when you get shoved into a tight space and you're living on top of like everything around you, it's not a very nice place to live when that happens, right? Well, it's the same thing for your plants. If everything's smashed together and then it's really hard and it's you struggle to move around and they can't wiggle their roots through the soil. So this is helping stop that and basically make our soil have more aeration, and that aeration helps bring in all these beneficial microbes and also helps stop any sort of issues with root rot, which happens when your water gets too soggy or wet. So that's what we're going to be using the perlite for. All right, let's get to mixing. All right, you're going to want a few tools for this. You're going to want a garden hose. The leakier, the better, in my case. You're going to want a shovel to mix with. And then you're going to want all the ingredients I just showed you. First, we're going to start off with our coconut coir. The coconut coir is going to take a little while, especially if it's in a compressed form. If you're not getting it in a compressed form and you actually were able to get bagged coconut coir, then you're not going to need to do this step. But I'm going to do it here. And typically, you want to use warm water for this, but if you don't have any available, cold water will do. It'll just take a little longer. This is lukewarm because the sun's been shining on this hose. But you're going to want to use about a gallon of water to rehydrate this coconut coir brick. And we're going to do that. It's going to take about roughly 30 minutes, 30 to 40 minutes. So we're going to get this all wet down in here. And I'm going to put actually 2 in here. So we're going to use 2 bricks. So that's 20 pounds of coconut coir total. And this is going to probably net me somewhere around, I would say, 12 to 15 cubic feet, I would say, of soil. So it does net you quite a bit of soil. I might actually have to do it in two different batches here, but so we're going to get this all wet down. We're going to put our coconut coir in, and then we'll see where we're at in terms of space inside of my bucket here after we're done. So I'll be right back once the coconut coir is rehydrated. All right, unfortunately, my actual mic died during this whole segment, so I figured I would record some kind of our questions and answers segment while I'm sitting here mixing. And one of those questions is, can you use vermiculite instead of perlite? The answer is yes. Vermiculite holds more water though, so your mix is going to be a little less airy, and you're going to want to use it sparingly. So you're going to want to use about 10 to 15% instead of 20%. You don't want to go as heavy with vermiculite. So if you have vermiculite on hand, go ahead and use it. Where do I find Coco coir? Most garden centers carry it, to be honest. You can order online. look for brands like Mother's Earth or General Hydroponics. Check for the descriptions in the link. I can link those here below. Is this a good mix for indoor plants? Absolutely. It absolutely is. It's actually fantastic for indoor plants, especially with those higher quantities of perlite. It's light, it's well draining, and it makes really good for your potted plants. One thing to note here is that this mix should actually hold together slightly when you grab it, but it should crumble easily. So make sure that is the consistency you're getting when you actually are finished mixing this compost. So and this soil mix. So make sure that you're just testing that soil. If it's not adding up and it's not sticking together properly, then you've probably added a little too much perlite. You might have to add some more compost or some more of your coco coir or peat moss. Or you might need to add a little water. It might be too dry. So just check that. I would check the water first and then go with adding more if it's still not holding together. If it falls apart really easily, that's not a bad thing, because you might actually have plenty of perlite in it to the point where you're not going to cause any major issues with any sort of root rot or you'll have plenty of drainage. Peppers will definitely thank you for that. Tomatoes like that, even though they do like the water. And just most garden plants in general will actually love a mix that is very loose, especially tuber plants. So potatoes love that type of mix, as well as sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes will adore that mix. So just keep that in mind, guys, that those vegetables that you're growing are going to really thrive in a mix that has not a ton of your just nutrient-rich compost and peat moss and coco coir in it. You want that perlite is a very, very important addition to this. Now you'll see that I added 3 5-gallon buckets full of perlite. That was a little bit much in my end result when I tested it, but honestly, it was just about on that edge to where it was holding together, but it was definitely a little crumbly, and so it was on the edge of that 20%. So that's perfectly fine within the tolerances. This isn't rocket science. We're not being perfectionists here, guys. We're just trying to get rough estimates of our quantities. Quick little hint: you might want to wear a mask when you're dealing with this stuff, or hold your breath, because it is about to get dusty. It spews dust everywhere. So just keep that in mind. It's not great to get in your lungs. You're gonna cough. I would recommend that you don't, because this actually is volcanic rock, and so it has a lot of silicate and stuff in there that can actually damage your lungs pretty bad. So just keep that in mind. Safety first. So anyway, that's the mix. We're gonna mix up the rest of it here. I'm gonna put you on a little bit of some gentle music for a B-roll as we are ending and we get to the mixing part. you have it, folks. We got ourselves a whole pile of mix here for your containers, and you can see that I've already planted out one whole container out of this. It's a 20-gallon container, and it'll house 2 of my peppers, a Georgia flame pepper and then a jalapeno pepper. And then it'll also house 2 of my basil plants, and it'll grow them quite marvelously. Now, I want to address a couple different elements to this before we close out. And I want to address nutrients. Now, that compost we added is going to add quite a bit of nutrients to this mix. It's going to allow the plants to grow relatively stress-free for a while, but they will run out, and typically peppers are heavy feeders. So you're gonna probably want to add, and this is something that I do when I'm filling my containers, and unfortunately I didn't film it, sorry. But you're gonna wanna put about, like, I would say a half of a cup to a full cup scattered throughout the container, and kind of the first layer and then a second layer of your organic blood meal. Typically, like about a half a cup works great. You're going to want to do the same thing with your bone meal. You're going to want to take probably, really one handful works good, and dust it on one layer and then dust it on your second layer. And then you're going to want to take just a tablespoon of this and do roughly a half of that tablespoon on the upper layer and then half on the lower layer of your potash. And that is going to give you enough nutrients to where you don't have to feed them, as these slowly break down in the soil for relatively probably close to mostly the growing season. So you don't have to worry about fertilizing them very much. Now, if you're doing a potted plant, you can do the same thing. You just want to add all those in there into the mix before you pot the plant up. And that will feed the plant for a while. Now, it's going to run out at some point as well. If you're doing a long-term plant, like a house plant or a potted plant, you're going to have to do this on the topsoil again, typically. Now, another key element here is that there's some variability with your mix. You can add less peat moss or no peat moss if you want. You could do completely coconut coir. There is variability with peat moss. I know some people don't like to use it, but peat moss is something that I like to use to reduce that acidity like we talked about. Now you can also, if you're using this mix to grow succulents, you can increase your perlite up to about 30 to 40%. So increase the perlite will then increase your aeration, and it will definitely help with your drainage. So you'll end up with easier growing succulents such as aloe vera and things like that. They really like to have well draining, aerated, and very loose soil. So this right here is roughly about 30% perlite. Shoveling all this up, and I'm going to be moving it into my wheelbarrow and also a storage bin. Storage bin is very nice to use for this. That way you can store it. Or it'll be going right all into grow bags right now, because I have probably enough grow bags to fill this. So that's another kind of thing to look at, is that if you want, you can definitely do all coco coir if you prefer, but it's up to you. There's a lot of variability with this mix, and that's the nice thing about mixing up your own soil, is that you have all the control about what goes in it. You don't have to outsource that to the company that makes the soil. The people that make that peat moss that I'm using, which is black gold, they do make a great potting mix, but it is actually like about $16.99 for a 2 cubic foot bag. That two cubic foot bag dumped out onto this wouldn't even equal half this pile. This right here in front of us is probably at least 10 cubic feet, and then I already took off another about 4 to 6 cubic feet to fill my grow bag over there. So you're going to be making so much more soil for yourself. You're going to be making so much more soil to fill your beds, and it's so much cheaper. Now let's break down cost. Our perlite here was about $30 for this bag. Now I got this on sale. You can find deals for Amazon on this all the time, and this is a cost that it's not a one-time cost, but a cost that you're going to have broken down throughout the time of using it. I only used about a quarter of the bag here, and so I have another 3 different mixes I can put together to actually use this bag up. And so that, or beds that I can apply it to. So and you can see how this is a kind of almost not a one-time cost, but a very usable cost. You don't have to buy the $30 bag every time. It actually, you break that down, that's roughly, you're going to be spending about $10 per batch, right? So that's one cost. The other cost is our compost. Our compost costs $7.99 a bag. So that's, roughly around 15, $16 for your total cost for your compost. And then you have your Coco coir. Coco coir can be found at Home Depot for $17.99 a block. So when you push all that together, you're making 3 times the soil plus your peat moss if you're adding it. Peat moss can be found for anywhere from $16.99 for a 2 cubic foot bag to $19.99 for a 3 cubic foot bag. And I didn't even use a whole 3 cubic foot bag. I used 3/4 of a cubic foot bag, or 3 cubic foot bag, and that made up this whole pile. So you're seeing how the cost. I basically spent right around $100, and I'll break out each cost here on screen. Maybe over here to the right of me or right below me here, you'll see the overall cost breakout of what it costs for everything put together. Now, when you break that up to also the next thing, and I'm going to bring that up right down here as well, what it costs to buy roughly the same amount of soil in a 2 cubic foot bag increment. And you'll see that there is definitely a cost savings, and it's just a little bit of work, a little bit of labor, and you can be a little bit more frugal with your garden. So let's just to break that down. It is a very easy method to grow your plants. Now, I think we should probably close out with that. And I appreciate you guys coming in to visit. I appreciate you guys watching. Now, tell me what you guys are growing this year here in your garden. Do you make up your own soil mix? Tell me down in the comments. I'd love to know. And definitely give this video a like, a comment, a subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And we'll see you next time on the Italian Garden. You stay planty, plant parents. Catch you next time.